local bookstores and booksellers keep afloat with the competitive marketplace of big box stores, the automaticity of online services, and the influx of ebooks? Why do authors seek out local bookshops, these bastions of literary communities, to pitch their wares? An article in the New York Times with the headline, "Anchors of Authenticity," reported in June 2019, the American Booksellers Association, a trade group for independent bookstores, has grown to 1,887 members with 2,524 locations as of May 15th, the highest participation since at least 2009, when there were about 1,650 indie bookstores, the group said. Sales of digital books fell 3.6% in 2018, a third straight decline, while hardback sales rose 6.9%, according to the Associated American Publishers.
The buy local movement and a desire for inclusive community atmospheres helped the resurgence of independent bookstores. On a 2018 podcast on NPR, our competition, it's called The Indicator, with Stacey Vanek Smith and Patty Hirsch, they shared that since 2009 to 2018, there's been a 40% increase in the number of independent bookstores opening. While the local bookstore business did have a sharp decline in the 80s and 90s, we're witnessing a new wave of recovery now.
We are. So how do local bookstore owners and authors partner together to support each other through community events, authentic relationship development, and access diverse publications? Are there benefits to having physical shops that cater to local interests and tastes? To answer these questions, we have local bookstore owner Jill Hendrix and author Susan Boyer. For the first time at our table, we've actually traveled off location from our studio to record from Fiction Addiction, the bookstore that Jill owns.
Technically, it's not our table anymore. It's Jill's table.
It's Jill's
and
table.
And we're sitting at it. Hi, I'm Holland Webb.
Hi, I'm Amy Boland.
And you're listening to The Afterword, a conversation about the future of words. Jill Hendrix grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, and graduated magna cum laude from Yale University. She grew up working in publishing and internet startups in New York for 5 years, and then returned to Greenville and founded the independent bookstore Fiction Addiction in 2001. She's the past president of the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance and past treasurer of the SC Academy of Authors. She continues to manage Fiction Addiction and also offers coaching to other bookstore owners through her website, jillhendrix.com. What got you interested in being a bookstore owner?
And my first job out of college was working in the publishing industry. But I soon discovered that it's really hard to make a living in New York on a publishing salary. And so I followed a friend of mine to an internet startup called Juno Online Services, where I basically doubled my salary and could finally pay off my credit card and, survive. And I really liked the fast-paced environment of a startup, but I missed the books, and I kind of wanted to do my own thing. Mm-hmm. So I got this idea of maybe doing my own bookstore, and it made sense to come back to Greenville and do it here rather than trying to do it in New York, which would have been pretty expensive at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, Susan M. Boyer writes the USA Today bestselling Liz Talbot mystery series. Her debut novel, Low Country Boil, won the Agatha Award for Best First Novel and garnered several other awards and nominations. Low Country Boomerang, the 8th Liz Talbot mystery, will be released September 3rd, 2019. Susan loves beaches, southern food, and small towns where everyone knows everyone and everyone has crazy relatives. We've talked about that on previous episodes. You'll find all of the above in her novels. Susan and her husband live in Greenville and visit the Low Country often. Welcome. And what are you working on currently?
I'm currently working on Liz Talbot number 9, which comes out in May of next year.
Wow. Excellent.
Tell us a little bit about those Liz Talbot books, because I haven't read any of them, but I love mysteries. So.
Oh, well, they're a mystery series about a private investigator named Liz Talbot who lives in the Low Country near Charleston, and she solves a different case in every book, sort of like a grown-up Nancy Drew. Mm-hmm. I do this because as a child I wanted to be Nancy Drew. That was my very first career goal. And so I have an encapsulated mystery in each book, but Liz's family and friends and sort of the town around them, that story sort of goes from book to book. Mm-hmm. So a lot of readers like to start with the first.
Is she a little more like a Miss Marple kind of character, or is she more like a thriller? She's a police officer?
She's a private investigator,
Oh, okay.
and she's licensed by the state of South Carolina. She's very good at her job. She uses a lot of modern technology. She's not one of those who, can't function with a computer or an iPhone or whatever. She's just very good at her job. She has a lot of savvy. She's smart. Her problems come more from the personal aspect. She's got some crazy family that contribute the humor to the books, but she's a good detective. I studied private investigators because I wanted her to be a competent detective. Excellent. I read the book, The Idiot's Guide to Private Investigation.
Have you ever read the Mara Motswe books in Botswana? Mm-hmm. She had one book that she used. What was it? Somebody's Guide to Private Detection or something, and that was like her Bible of private detection. That's the only thing she read, and she opened a detective agency.
Well, I have not read those, but I decided early on that if the writing thing didn't work out, then maybe I could actually be a private investigator because I had studied it quite a bit. Cool. That I would never do that.
At least you had options.
Yeah.
All right, let's dig into how local stories support local economies. Jill, one of the indicators for any success of any venture is ROI, return on investment. So what have been some of your ROIs in the bookstore industry?
Sure. Well, I think until, Jeff Bezos started Amazon, no one really opened a bookstore thinking that you were going to have this huge financial ROI. We've been around for 17 years, so obviously we've been successful and we are able to continue as a bookstore. But it's really more the emotional and the personal ROI that I get out of it. So I love just connecting customers with authors that they're going to love and just sharing my love for an author and seeing that excitement with another customer. I also love working for myself and the freedom that comes from owning your own business.
Mm. That's excellent.
So what's changed in 17 years in the bookstore industry?
Everything has changed. When I started my store, it started as a used bookstore, and now we do almost all new books. So over time, we've just adapted to our local economy and the competition. When I started, the Open Book was the longtime independent here in town, and then unfortunately they closed. And so we found that there was a niche there that we could fill to support our local authors and to do a lot of author events. And so we moved into that space. And then, of course, the technology. So when I started my store in 2001, kind of the heyday of the independent bookstore was in jeopardy because you'd had the chains come in, you had Amazon, and then after I started, you had ebooks. So I at least was starting knowing I was facing all that competition. Whereas I think part of what contributed to some of the decrease in independent bookstores at that time was like that they'd been at this height and then they just kept seeing their sales drop and drop with the competition. Mm-hmm. So there's been a lot of stuff to adapt to, especially technology.
I know you mentioned supporting local authors, but you've had national authors come through here. I get notifications from you pretty regularly.
Yes, we have kind of a two-tier author event priority. So one is to support all of our local authors the best that we can. And then the other is to bring really strong authors to Greenville that we think, our customers are going to be super excited about the event. So one of our best events that we've had is with Nicholas Sparks, and we've had him 3 times in the past, and that gets everybody super excited. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're looking for, is events that are going to really excite our community.
Mm-hmm. Susan, what about you? What are some of your ROIs? What changes have you seen in the industry over the last?
My goodness. It is so hard for an author to even figure out ROI. The great mystery of being an author for me is, what drives sales. It's kind of like just throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the wall and you never really know what is sticking. And so you just keep doing everything that you can to reach readers, and you're not really sure which things are working because they're just not tools there to track what leads to a sale, except in a very small environment. For example, here, we kind of know what sells books in this store. Jill's newsletter is very effective, and over time I've developed a customer base of people who buy books in the store. But, in a broader area, it's very difficult to track what exactly causes those sales. So I try not to worry about that quite so much. I do everything that I know to do, and when I know something new is working for someone else, I'll give that a try. If I see the needle move a little bit, then I think, okay, maybe that's working, but you never really know for sure. It's almost one of those things that's impossible to track. which is maddening.
Although I will step in, and I do think that Susan is doing something great, which is that she has a series. Because I've seen that series authors, that every time she releases a new book in the series, the sales of book one go back up again. So she's getting new readers every time with every new book.
That makes sense.
We can kind of agree with that. I mean, we've seen new subscribers to the podcast go back and listen to previous episodes. So I do think having something in a series is supportive, and that makes sense.
Something else reminded me of our podcast, too, that you were saying. Somebody was asking me about it a day or two ago, and I said, Amy and I decided we had one metric for success before we started. Are we having fun? And if the answer was yes, then we would keep doing it if no one but our mothers listened. And if the answer was no, then we would quit. We didn't care if we had thousands of listeners. So that was the one thing we wanted to do, was have fun. It's kind of a little bit like what you're talking about.
Right. I enjoy the process. I enjoy writing. I enjoy meeting readers, and I'm doing what I love, and I have no idea what things are working. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? I mean, like, who would do
it
that?
doesn't. We can completely relate to that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Ryan Raffaelli describes a phenomena about the Swiss watch business in 1970 to 2008. He said that the success of the reinvention of the industry came from two sides. One, the watch collectors and the old employee as institutional guardians who encourage preservation of past technologies and traditions in the face of change. And these guardians served as a counterbalance to institutional entrepreneurs who push for organizational and industry change at all cost. Both are necessary for successful reemergence. Just as other industries rose from the ashes and kept pace at an edge regarding relevancy, how do bookstore owners manage the task of remaining current, Jill?
Well, so I think this is a great question. So publishing and bookselling, like watchmaking, are very old and traditional industries, and they don't necessarily react well to change.
Yes.
So I think that's what we saw in the 80s and 90s was, everybody, like, there was all this technological change with the chains, with Amazon, and then there was just like, we don't like it. And now I think there's been enough time that people are starting to adapt and to realize that in the beginning with technological change, it really benefits the giants of the industry that have that money, that can invest in it. But over time, the cost of technology comes down. And then everybody else can benefit from it and really get creative with it. So I think that, the way that social media and podcasting have reduced the cost of advertising is one example of that. That's really helping small businesses like myself.
Excellent. Excellent. Do you have any idea how things have changed, maybe in a resurgence for authors?
Honestly, no. I'm still relatively new at this. My first book came out in 2012, so everything I know I've learned since then, so fairly recently. And it's hard for me to say really what's changed. I'm still learning.
Sure. You came in after Amazon was a big deal and after the chain bookstores were in. But I've heard that in the UK, some of the chain bookstores are making it by acting like independent stores. Is that believable to you?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I really think that for businesses to be successful, they have to connect with their community. And there's only so much that you can do at a national chain level, and that you really need to give some independence to your community stores. And we've seen for a long time that things that independent booksellers do, that then our competition adopts.
Interesting. Can you give an example?
Independent booksellers always do lots of store picks and shelf talkers and stuff. So, our competition has started their own discovery series of authors and that sort of thing. I'm sure there's lots of other examples over the years that my other indie booksellers have initiated and then seen other people just follow their practices.
But that's fascinating because I don't think I would have necessarily put that together. To say, okay, well, here's somebody with this entrepreneurial idea, and then it gets kind of swallowed up again. So that's very interesting.
I was thinking, too, do you remember when we were talking about libraries in smart cities? And one of our guests said, I think a real benefit that libraries bring in smart cities and hyper-connected world is you could have some space that's just technology free and people could be there without having to deal with screens and wires and wireless and everything. And can bookstores also sort of provide that counterintuitive, almost Luddite approach? Okay, you can come here and have some technology free space.
I think so. I mean, there are certain stores that actually like have signs up, please, turn off your cell phone, that sort of thing. We haven't actually gone that far. And then another thing that I've heard about is people starting just reading hour. Like it's like a book club, but you don't discuss the book. You just come and read at the bookstore for like an hour, and everybody just reads. It's set reading time. So I do think that there is this desire for an escape from technology for a lot of people.
I've heard of people getting screen fatigue. I mean, that's a buzzword you hear a lot, screen fatigue. And I think younger people a lot get that. And so they want now to get away from the screen because they have their phone, they have their tablet, they're using it for school. Their textbooks are on the screen a lot of times. So they want to get away from that when they're reading for pleasure.
Those are excellent points.
Well, Susan, what do you do for marketing now? What are some of the things that you do?
Oh, wow. Well, I have a newsletter, and I do some advertising on social media. I do a certain number of appearances. This release, I'm not doing quite as many, but usually I travel with the book release and go to different stores in different cities and different events and promote the book, meet new readers that way, sometimes library events, sometimes luncheons, different things, but usually affiliated with a bookstore. And I do some things through Goodreads, like I did with this new book. I did a Goodreads giveaway of like 10 copies, and that sort of gets the buzz going about the book. Hopefully people shelve it within Goodreads, which is a tool for readers. If anyone's not familiar, you can kind of keep track of what you read, what you want to read. And so a lot of readers are on that site. That's all I can
You said
think
you
of.
do a newsletter. If someone wants to get your newsletter, where do they go?
They go to my website. I have a website and it has links to everything there. But if you're there for more than like 10 seconds, it'll pop up and ask you. But also on the bottom of every screen, there's a sign-up form.
And we'll include that in our show notes and make sure that
Excellent.
your information is on.
Is that SusanBoyer.com?
It's SusanMBoyer.com.
SusanMBoyer.com, and then I can just put my email address in, and I'll get a newsletter every so often?
Yep.
Pretty cool.
Awesome. So, Jill, what are some of your challenges as an independent bookseller?
So I think my main challenge, and often that of my customers, is a phrase that's on one of our store T-shirts. So many books, so little time. So as the pace of modern life increases, time seems to become our most precious commodity. And so at Fiction Addiction, we try and offer our customers a really carefully curated selection of books that, we really think are the cream of the cream. So it's stuff that we have read personally. It's stuff that we have a track record with. It's, fiction or nonfiction that we think is specifically going to appeal to this community. And we get to know our customers. We develop a long-term relationship with them. And I'll order books specifically knowing that these 3 customers are going to like it. And then we'll email them, to let them know.
I was going to say that as a reader, which of course I was a reader long before I was a writer, I really appreciate that because when an author that I love or even a similar author has a new book out, I'll get an email from Jill or someone in the store, hey, we've got this new book in, it's very similar to this one, or you bought this author's last book, and would you like us to hold you a copy? And the answer 90% of the time is, oh, yes, please. So, yeah, that's a great service that they do.
Yeah. So basically, we just want to, honor our customers' time and really make sure that we're making a good connection for them between, what we recommend, the books that they buy, and to really be a resource for them.
You mentioned your competition a little bit. What are some challenges in that world that you might face?
Well, the main challenge is that, we don't compete on price. It's really hard for any store that has a brick and mortar building to compete with an online business that is not paying retail rents. Warehouse pricing is much different from a retail storefront. And we have real people and staff and not robots that we're paying. So we don't really compete on price. And if that's what people are looking for, then that's not really our customer. We provide that additional value of the events that we offer, of our knowledge, of, having the community space, getting to know our customers, and really being able to recommend for them.
Kind of that article talked about the institutional guardian. That's kind of what you would like to see maybe come in more into this store, in this space, to challenge some of that pushback of, well, this is more expensive. Well, but this is an institutional guardian. We've got a sacred space here, and having that as part of a gift that you almost give to the patron because you're doing that extra work, that customer service, if you will.
Yes, and there's a book about the third place, and so bookstores for many people is that third place. And, if that's important to you, then you need to support it.
Absolutely.
So really consider where you're spending your dollars.
I love that. How about you, Susan? As an author, what are some challenges that you have found? Besides writing, we know that.
getting everything done. It's a constant balancing act because I wear a lot of hats. So there's the writing, that's the priority, but then also there's managing the business. It's a small business. So I have advertising to do, which we talked about. I have, reader emails to answer. I have sort of the spreadsheet that I keep that tracks sales to the extent that I can from my royalty statements. And that's part of the challenge is I get data months later. So it's hard to know, real time what works with advertising because I get the data months afterwards. So it's a little difficult there. Just the day-to-day, managing a business, all the things that anybody does that manages a business. So I wear a lot of hats. It's a challenge. I have a hard time getting everything done, covering all the bases.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot. Sounds like a lot.
Okay, what's the essential piece of information we can take away regarding bookstores and the local economy?
Well, I think the main thing is that study after study has been showing that shopping locally just keeps more money in your community. And once it stays in your community, it's there to be used for everything that you support. Schools, roads, jobs, parks, everything that's important to you. And so I really believe in the concept of voting with your dollars. So if you support something, then you really should look at where you're spending your money and make sure that you're following through with what you say you support. If you enjoy, shopping in a physical bookstore, meeting local authors, then we would love to have your business. And you'd be surprised at how just a small shift in purchasing can really make a difference to small businesses.
How about you?
I'm sorry.
She's
been talking for a minute. I'm sorry. Do what?
I wowed you with my answer and you forgot the question.
I did. I'm like, she did such a good job, but I'm like, I'm sorry. What was the question?
What's the essential piece of information we can take away from this conversation regarding authors and the local economy?
Oh, dear. And what was it that you handed me? Because I'm sorry. I honestly,
she said,
absolutely, you should shop local.
Right. If you shop local, you keep money
local.
Here's the
thing. Authors, first and foremost, like I said, are readers. And so we enjoy that third place that Jill's talking about. We're book people. So as readers, we like to come and be a part of that third place. And in order to have those third places, we have to support them. So what she said, you vote with your wallet. You keep the money here.
Well, you're a South Carolina author, but you're also a national bestseller, right?
That's true.
So how do you emphasize the South Carolina, even the low country portion? It's not just South Carolina. It's that particular, third of South Carolina that's the low country. And at the same time, you must have people all over the country who get really excited about a new book about Charleston.
Well, I always hope to, and they seem to be excited, for the next book that's coming. So that's good. And I'm happy to have readers all over the country. I like to go and do some traveling and visit them when I can. I don't get as much opportunity to do that because of the time constraints. But I like getting out and meeting readers. So.
But there could well be people who plan trips to Charleston and say, "Oh, while I'm there, I want to see this place or that place or the other place."
They tell me all the time that they do, that they'll go to this restaurant or that restaurant because they've read about it in a book. So yeah, and actually, I set some of the scenes in the books here. I have my detective going back and forth, and in the opening of the first book, she's actually in Greenville and has been here for a while. She went to Clemson, she's living in Greenville, and then she moves back home to the Low Country, which is where she grew up. So I set some scenes locally whenever I can, but people like to read about the coast. That's what my agent keeps telling me. People want to read about the coast, and I think it's true. People do love that setting, and Charleston is a great tourist mecca. So
well, what another opportunity to support local economy.
Right.
When I've read something in one of your books, I want to go see it. That sparked my interest. I actually handed a book today to a teacher written by Jacqueline Woodson, and in it was a reference to Greenville, and she went, "Oh, Greenville." Greenville. So there is some of that, yes, I can support the local economy through my role as a bookseller, but I can also as an author through what I'm writing about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there are a few local restaurants that I've used and several in Charleston. And so I always use real places. My characters go to real coffee shops and real restaurants and real inns and like that. So, yeah.
Oh.
So from this conversation, we've learned that bookstores and their owners are valuable characters in our communities. And we've learned how authors and readers intersect through local bookstores to produce authentic and sustainable access to words and the future of words and reading.
And we've learned about adapting and third places and how those can become such an encouraging community place. So thank you to Susan and Jill for talking with us today.
Yes, and we'll be continuing conversation about how local stories support local economies with bookstore owner Jill Hendrix and USA Today bestselling novelist Susan Boyer next week. So in the meantime, please like us on Facebook, give us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, you are welcome at our table. And next week, you're welcome at Jill's table too.